So what we're going to do here is learn how to create UV maps within Maya using a combination of planar views and camera views and cutting and unfolding the different elements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some planar UV mapping, and in order to show you how this works, I've decided just to use a very simple boxy room with very flat surfaces. So I've got the general room, I've got the floor, the doors, the windows and the ceiling and everything else just set in a very simple flat way. Now you'll notice that my actual UV models are only one-sided, they're actually using the planes that I've just kind of extruded and shaped in order to get the desired effect. And that's because actually, if you go into a lot of computer games, you'll see a lot of walls, they're not actually very detailed on their 3D modeling. They're actually very flat, and all of the texturing is just mapped on later. And that's just to really save a huge amount of space and to reduce the burden on the graphical engine. And that's what I'm going to show you doing this today. So let's get going with some planar mapping. So to begin with, we really need to get rid of some of these objects because we've just got too many that we're dealing with at once. So I just want to focus on one thing in particular that I'm working on. So in order to do that, I'm just going to hide any elements that I don't want to work on at the moment, which is pretty much everything other than the floor itself. And from here, we need to get ourselves into the UV workspace. That gives us our object that we want to UV map and then this empty area here. Now, sometimes when you actually first enter your UV mapping, you might find that you've actually got everything you've created here on your UV map already. So it'll look something like this, and you'll get a map that matches your object. Now you can see here that this does not match the scale of this. As you can see, this is very rectangular, whereas this is a perfect square. Now that's partly because, without going into too many details, in the background of Maya, you've shaped an object. So in this case, I took a regular plane, which starts off as basically like this, call it a 2x2 grid or a 1x1 grid. I've then stretched it and deformed it and twisted it to make it bigger, and now it's a lot larger than its original form. However, in the background, the UV map's not been updated, and this is why you'll get an odd, very square map in the background. It doesn't matter what you've actually created, you will actually find that it'll sometimes still look like a square on the original UV map. All you need to do is select it and delete it. So don't select this and delete it because that'll get rid of your actual object. It's this here. This is what you select, your UV map, and delete it. Now you have an empty UV map. What we're going to do then is in object mode, make sure you've got the object that you want to UV map ready. And then before you do anything, just pop up into the UV set editor. And you can see that you'll normally have a single map to work with. So this is the default map. You'll see that it won't let me delete it. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to create a new map and double click on it and then rename it floor. And now I've got my floor UV map, and this is the one I'll be working on. Now from here I want to do a planar. So once I've got my object selected and I've got it all selected, I'm going to right click here, I'm going to go down to create, and I'm going to go into planar. Now what I'm not going to do, however, is just select this. I'm going to actually go over to my tick box because I want the dialog open here. So you'll see that you've got a few options. You've got fit to best plane, fit to a bounding box, and then you've got the axes that you're going to look from. You can also do it from a camera view if you choose to. You can keep the image width and height ratio. Now, this is why it's important to come into this dialog, because this here is defaulted to being turned off. Now, if it's turned off, you get that effect where you end up with a square or whatever it is you originally started with. By keeping the image's width and height ratio, it's actually going to match this perfectly. And then, even if we want to, can create new UV sets while we're doing it. So you don't actually need to go up into here, do to the UV set. You can create them dynamically. Now, what we've got to remember is when we're doing planar, is the direction that we're looking at. So, because this is the floor, we're going to be looking at it from Y going downwards. If we look at it from the X, we're actually just going to get a thin line. In fact, I'll show you that to begin with. So if we look at it from the X and apply it, what you get is a thin line, because from the X here, it's a two-dimensional object. Look at it from the Y, and again, apply it, and there we go, we've got it perfect. You can also click project, and then it'll close the dialog. And there we go, it's actually made it so that it perfectly matches. And now we have ourselves a very nice UV map to work with, and that's all we really need at this stage. That's it really. We don't need to do anything else with this at the moment. There's nothing really advanced technique wise we need to do, because it is a two-dimensional plane. It's looking down and it's in perfect scale. You can now go into the image and you can create a UV snapshot, and obviously you would save that wherever you wanted it to. I'm not going to look at the actual texture mapping today because it's not relevant. The important thing is that when you apply it and save it somewhere, the UV map forms a template for you to actually do all your graphics in. Okay, moving on from there then, we now have the floor ready to UV map. Next thing I'm going to move on to is a different component. I'm going to probably do something a bit more complex. I'm probably going to do the grate that I've created in the floor. So my next aim then is to unhide everything. Using display, I'm going to show everything. And I'm just going to select all of these. Now the reason behind that is you will notice that all of the UVs for the other components are showing up on my floor one. I need to get them completely deleted off it. It's just so that each UV set only corresponds to the thing that it's named for. So this is now purely for the floor. Now that I've done that, I can hide everything I don't want to UV map next, just leaving myself with my little grid here. Now you'll notice that my grid is a bit more detailed in its modelling than the floor was. There's actually a bit of a drop in it, a bit of depth to it. That means that I'm not planning on texturing everything. And it's really going to be up to me about what these little things look like on their textures. So once again, I'm going to head across and I'm going to right click, I'm going to create, and I'm going to do planar again. And I'm going to get my options up. Again, because it's all of its detailing is done from above, I'm going to use the y-axis. And I'm going to call this grid. So I'm actually going to create a new UV set. I'm also going to keep the image width height ratio. That's very important that all of my ratios work. Then I'm going to project it. Now, looking from above, it looks completely flat, but that isn't quite true. But what happens is with this planar view, anything that's to the side here, anything that's on an angle is not showing up, and that's creating a very unusual appearance. But what it does mean is that I've now UV mapped from above. So how can I fix this? How can I actually see the side parts? Well, this is where we have to start going into a bit more detail, and this is why we can't simply just map from above and hope that it works. So I'm going to start doing that slowly now and showing you how to fully unwrap a UV, how to cut it and sew it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by taking the actual floor to begin with, and I'm going to actually go over here. I'm going to go into cut. I'm going to cut this away. Now you'll see when I first try and move this, it's still attached to all the rest of this. However, if I click off and double click here, which is the other part of it, you'll see that it's actually separate. I'm going to move this out of the way, and you'll see now I've got just this one, this nice UV map of all of these parts of the grid. I'm going to move them out of the way. Now what the cutting has done, however, is it's fully separated every single part of this. So what I need to do as well is I need to sew them back together. However, I've got to choose the faces properly. So if I select the face in general, you'll see here, if I click on that edge, you'll see it's still showing there. What that means, if I try and sew that one, it will basically stretch and try and join them back together, and that's not what I want at all. What I want to do is I just want to sew these floor pieces back together. In order to do that, I'm just going to hold Control and then hold Shift even. I'm just going to select the edges that I want, which is the edges between all of these. Now it does take a bit of work, and you can see here I've accidentally selected that one. I need to unselect that, and then when I right click and sew them, perfect, I've got no stretching or anything, and these are now one big group. I can't move individual ones without getting that stretching effect, which is what I want. Okay, and that's that floor piece out the way. Now I'm going to start showing you how to get to these inner ones and do them properly. Now, if you look at the grid, it's broken down into the actual rim of the grid, the raised parts and the lowered parts, and I can actually tackle these all separately and individually. So I'm going to do the inner first. I'm going to do these recesses. For myself, I'm going to pretend that they are holes in the grid. So looking down into a sewer, if I texture these, I want them to be very, very dark in colour and very murky. I've selected them all. Again, I'm going to go across and I'm going to cut them all out. And then, of course, I'm going to move the rest of it away. We've got a kind of chessboard effect slowly coming up here, haven't we? I'm going to reselect all of these. I'm going to right click. Now, I'm not going to sew them back together because look what happens. They kind of try and re-stretch and reattach over here. And the problem is I can't do it by individual edges because they're attached to something here all the time. There's nowhere that I can actually do it that doesn't affect one of these. What I can do, however, is I can play around with this because I know that every single texture that I do for this is going to look the same. All I need to do is stack similar. Now what it's done is it's basically put them on top of each other. You can see if I select one in particular and try to pull it away, they're all stacked one on top of the other, which is what I want. That saves me a lot of problems later on with texture mapping, because instead of texture mapping each individual cube, I now have to just put a texture under here and do it for all of them. I'm going to pop this over here for now. I'm just going to put this here. So it's roughly where one of them would be in general. Now I've got that. I'm slowly building up my map. What is useful as well to do, if you're finding this hard to work out what you have done and haven't done, it's perfectly acceptable. So just hide anything you're not using at the moment or anything that you've completed. You can see you're going to find this model slowly breaking down and slowly getting completed. So what's my next part? Well, I suppose my next part is to do the rim of the grid. This is where we're getting into a bit more trickier stuff. So to do this, I'm going to select an entire length of this grid's outer edge. I'm actually going to do along, back again. I'm going to spin myself around. I'm going to get this edge, and I'm going to make sure I get the full corner. So now I've got an area to work with. I'm going to head over to my UV map, and I'm actually going to cut it, move out the way this part, and then reselect all of these. Now, this is where I'm going to actually use a different type of creation. I'm actually going to do camera based. So you can see I'm actually looking at it from my camera's view now. And then I want to unfold it. However, when I unfold it, you'll see that I get an odd shape to here. And that's because this corner here, these two faces are attached together. But if you kind of try to imagine opening a cardboard box and flattening it out, when two of the, well, three edges are still attached, you're going to get a kind of very odd warped appearance. So I'm just going to undo that, and I'm going to change how I do that by quite simply going into edge and selecting that edge there. And on my UV map, I'm going to cut it back across, and this time I'm going to make sure I've selected faces, and the reason behind that is if I selected edges, it would also select any edges attached to the other parts too, and I don't want that. Again, I'm going to go and modify, and I'm going to unfold it. And this time I've got the desired effect. You can see it's actually cut it. It's now like I've cut along that cardboard backs along one edge, and now it can flatten out quite nicely, and that's how you do it. And then I'm going to straighten my UVs just to make sure that they're nicely aligned. I'm going to move this, and I'm just going to double check now that this lines up well. Now you'll see to begin with, this is significantly bigger, and that's because I've re-unwrapped it, rescaled it, etc. I'm going to shrink it down now. This takes a bit more precision, as you might guess, because I've got this edge here what needs to be over, and this is the corner point. It's just trying to find the perfect center of these two, which I think's somewhere around here. And once I've got that scaled down a bit more, I'm not going to try and overdo it. I could try and get it as perfect as possible. You know, I'm happy with that. It's pretty much where I want it to be. You can see I've got a bit of an overhang here, but I'm not worried about that. And then I'm just going to pull this down. Okay, now I've done that and I've got that all together. I'm just going to hide that section. Now what I can do is I can use the same basic logic now all the way along. And that's really how simple it is actually. We can just unwrap things using this process. I'm going to obviously just go away and do all of this and show you the finished product. But what I would say is do the same thing for everything else. So even these inner ones, you don't need to waste a load of time. Okay, you don't need to spend absolutely hours and hours and hours moving things around. And obviously with these, if these are all going to look the same in appearance, really just make one map. Just make one single map for them, optimize them and lay them over each other. I could do the same for this up here if I wanted to. I could optimize and overwrap this.